It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hey, thank you so much for being here this Monday, January 13th. I don't know if you had a chance to listen. Joe Biden just sort of summarized the entire foreign policy of his administration. Maybe we are going to be getting more of these issue-specific sort of farewell speeches from Mr. Biden. You know what? He should. Why not? Remind us of how good we have it right before things are about to become very dark. 1 week from today, kids, the inauguration. 1 week from today. And then, there we go. Whew. There we go. I have a feeling that we can't even imagine at this moment in time how bad it's going to be. That's my fear. It was a parade of outrages last time around. And this time around, I think he is going to up the ante quickly. The one thing that I think we have to steel ourselves for, whether or not he accomplishes these multi-million mass deportations, he is going to get through the tax break for the billionaires. He's got a Republican Congress. He's got a Republican Senate. They are going to sign off on that. You know, Democrats can complain. We can wave our arms. We can say it's not fair. We can talk about it as ammunition to win back seats in the midterm elections. But that is the one thing that I fully expect him to accomplish. He says he's got, 20, 30 executive orders written up, ready to go on day one. So I hope this weekend, for those of you who didn't have to work, I hope this weekend you were able to find some zen, because we're going to have to pace ourselves. Remember, I told you that my word for 2025 was abide. We are going to abide. We are going to sustain. We are going to persevere. When Donald Trump was elected the first time, there was just such outrage, and everybody was like, I'm taking to the streets tomorrow. This time around, it is a little bit different. It seemed like a quirk of fate when he was elected the first time. This time around, it feels like a betrayal. It feels like our fellow Americans betrayed us. Out of misinformation, disinformation, a desire to burn it all down. You know, the right-wing media is great at making people feel like somehow they didn't get their fair share. That kind of outrage. This time around, rather than this huge outpouring of, we're going to take to the streets, I think our response needs to be measured. This is going to be a 4-year resistance. So don't wear yourself out in the early days. Again, not everybody can do everything, but everybody can do something. So pick out the cause that's near and dear to your heart. Maybe it's libraries. Maybe it's healthcare. Maybe it's women's healthcare and bodily autonomy. Whatever you feel passionate about, that's where you need to concentrate your energy and you need to fight. And you need to fight, and you need to fight, and you need to fight. So, as I said, President Biden spoke today talking about foreign policy. One part of that speech was a list of accomplishments that have happened in the last 4 years. I'm going to share portions of the Biden speech with you. We also are opening up the phone and text lines, as we always do, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. You can text me on that line, and you can call me on that line. And I am going to share with you, Biden spoke a little bit longer than I expected him to. Sometimes it's only 5 or 10 minutes, but this one was a more lengthy speech. So I'm going to bring you some of the bits from it that Andy Miles was able to pull off to give you kind of a feel for it. As I said, one of the things President Biden did was list the accomplishments of his administration. Let's start with that. Listen to this.
Today, I want to lay out what we've done, the opportunities we've created for America, and those opportunities going forward. Today, I can report to the American people our sources of national power are far stronger than they were when we took office. Our economy is booming, although there's more work to do. Our technologies, from artificial intelligence to biotech, quantum, and to advanced semiconductors, they're the envy of the world. And we have made the most significant investments in America and the American workers since the New Deal. To rebuild our roads and bridges, our ports and airports, clean water systems, affordable high-speed internet, and so much more. To build American manufacturing, to make advanced semiconductors, which we invented here at home. We made the largest investment in climate and clean energy ever anywhere on Earth in the history of the world, spurring nearly $500 billion in private sector investment. We've also significantly strengthened the defense industrial base, investing almost $1.3 trillion in procurement and research and development. In real dollars, that's more than America did in any 4-year period during the Cold War. This is going to ensure that we're fully equipped to fight and win wars, which is also the best way to deter wars in the first place. Today, I can report to the American people our alliances are stronger than they've been in decades. NATO is more capable than it's ever been, and many more of our allies are paying their fair share. Before I took office, 9 NATO allies are spending 2% of their GDP on defense. Now 23 are spending 2%. And look at the Indo-Pacific. We've made partnerships stronger and created new partnerships to challenge China's aggressive behavior and to rebalance power in the region. We did it, what few thought was possible, to build the first ever trilateral partnership between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. Then another among the United States, Japan, and the Philippines, drawing closer our Pacific allies to defend our shared security and prosperity. We brokered a defense pact known as AUKUS among the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific allies as only America is able to do. And we've taken the Quad to the next level. The United States, Japan, Australia, and India. When we had that first meeting, I was dumbfounded when they all called and said, "Can we do this at your house?" I think I'm kidding.
President Biden spoke on foreign policy today. That was a taste of it. He also talked about Russia and Iran. Let's listen to that.
We helped Ukrainians stop Putin. And now, nearly three years later, Putin has failed to achieve any of his strategic objectives. He has failed thus far to subjugate Ukraine, failed to break the unity of NATO, and failed to make large territorial gains. But there's more to do. We can't walk away. We rallied 50 nations to stand with Ukraine, not just in Europe, but for the first time in Asia as well. Because those countries in Asia know what happens in Ukraine matters to them as well. We delivered air interceptors, massive numbers of munitions, enacted relentless, unprecedented sanctions to keep Ukraine in the fight. And now Russia is struggling to replace what they are losing on the battlefield. And in terms of military equipment and fighters. And the ruble is under enormous pressure. As I saw it, when Putin launched his invasion, I had two jobs. One, to rally the world to defend Ukraine, and the other is to avoid war between two nuclear powers. We did both those things. Today, Ukraine is still a free, independent country with the potential for a bright future. And we laid the foundation for the next administration so they can protect the bright future of the Ukrainian people. And now, look at Iran. Did you ever think we'd be where we are with Iran at this moment? After those despicable attacks by Hamas on October the 7th, Iran directly attacked Israel twice with hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones. And twice they failed because the United States organized a coalition of countries to stop them and ordered U.S. aircraft to come to the defense of Israel. Now, Iran's air defenses are in shambles. Their main proxy, Hezbollah, is badly wounded. And as we tested Iran's willingness to revive the nuclear deal, we kept the pressure with sanctions. Now Iran's economy is in desperate straits. All told, Iran is weaker than it has been in decades. And if you want more evidence that we've seriously weakened Iran and Russia, just take a look at Syria. President Assad was both countries' closest ally in the Middle East. Neither could keep him in power. Quite frankly, neither really tried very hard. Now, I cannot claim credit for every factor that led to Iran and Russia growing weaker in the past 4 years. They did plenty of damage all by themselves.
Again, President Biden, at about, 1:20 today, Chicago time, 1:25, made a speech about the foreign policy accomplishments of his administration. I'm going to, throughout this first hour, I'm going to share clips from that. But I do want you to know that the text lines are open and the phone lines are open. I've already gotten one text wondering about, in the Trump administration, will vaccines still be free? That's a very good question. At least one Republican senator along those lines has come out to say that he will not support RFK Jr. As head of our whole medical establishment, which ordinarily would be a no-brainer, but there are so many people Trump has nominated who are so much worse. It kind of makes RFK Jr. look a little bit better by comparison, though 15,000 doctors signed a letter saying that this guy should absolutely in no way, shape, or form be leading any kind of health or medical administration. Will vaccines still be free? Let's hope so. Let's hope so. But who knows? who knows what this administration coming in is going to do. The only thing that I think I know for sure is that it's probably going to be worse than we're expecting. And I'm not expecting much. Let's go to the phone lines. Jim from Chicago is on the line. Hello, Jim. How are you today?
Hi, Joan. Sunday's talk show was a harbinger for the next 4 bizarre years. Adam Schiff is on, and I kept the volume down because I knew, but I thought I'll look in at it. And he was talking about with Jonathan Crowell, talking about the fires in California. And then at the end of this interview, he puts in Trump's tweet or how they got the correspondence. But Jonathan Crowell says, well, here's what Trump said. Trump said that they're incompetent, referring to the idea that if the MAGA was in California, the fires never would have happened. Mm-hmm. I mean, this were in store for it. But what really killed me was I thought that the Schiff would go into a kind of a offensive mode, but he took his hat in his hand and said, well, we were good to the red states and we were good to the blue states. And it seems like everybody's cowering, and it's just too much. And the other thing is, Joan, Biden was too old, right? Mm. But the young male voters, voted overwhelmingly for Trump, so there's something wrong with them. There's no doubt about it, because he's only 3 years younger than Biden. And the other thing is the vaccination thing, Joan, has really got to be looked at, because just the other night I went out to a crowded restaurant, and there was some kids there and so on and so forth. I came back, I've got like a chest cold. I'm like, I wonder to myself, is anybody vaccinated anymore? Or are they even bothering to get vaccinated for the flu? Or are we just going to have knock off another 100,000 Americans? Because he has no regard for human life.
Well, Jim, that is one of the big fears, is that we will start to see particularly children dying of diseases that are preventable, because there's talk. They haven't made a firm announcement, but there's talk about, vaccines are great, but maybe they shouldn't be required. Like maybe you shouldn't have to have certain vaccines to go to school. And you know what that's going to mean? That's going to mean kids are going to die.
Right. But why, Joe? What's the big picture with this Republican Party? What do they think it is? I mean, I know they've always been death on vaccinations, but why? I don't understand why.
The only thing that I can think, Jim, because you're absolutely right, it makes no sense whatsoever. It's this whole somehow it's a plot. Vaccinations are a plot, and maybe they're not as safe as those smart people who are those smart people who are always looking down on us and think we're stupid. Well, maybe it's a plot by those smart people, and we hate those smart people. We're going to show them.
But Joe, how did we end up in this paranoia of voter, like there's some scheme, like people are actually going into a conference room and scheming. It's impossible to believe. It's impossible to believe. But what a disappointment that was with the. I didn't want to look at it, but I thought, well, I'll give it a chance. But because I kept the volume down, and when I saw the tweet from Trump that everybody was incompetent, I'm like, well, there's 4 years of this insanity.
Yep. And Mike Johnson today apparently told reporters that he thinks that it probably makes sense to put some conditions on the aid that the federal government is going to give to California for all these wildfires. We should put some conditions on that, like, we'll rebuild homes, but no, we won't rebuild any abortion clinics. Who knows what he's talking about? But yeah, we're gonna make the people of California, many of whom at this point have lost everything, we're gonna make them jump through some hoops. Yeah, we're gonna make them suffer because California. They're not our voters. At least that's the thought. Though Kevin McCarthy came from California, as did Devin Nunes. So,
Yeah, but they're just what a crowd. And now Trump's starting it right away. So in other words, if somebody's on a talk show, he'll tweet in and they'll use that tweet immediately to confront the guest. So here's a Trump. It's almost like it's like a mad dictator somewhere but with a tweeting machine,
And, as far as Adam Schiff, look, my feeling about Adam Schiff, I think he's a very smart guy, and I think he is a man of good character and good moral values. But whenever he speaks, I feel like I'm listening to a professor at college.
Right.
I feel, he's got that. He may be making good points, but emotionally, he seems always so removed. He never seems to be very passionate about anything he says. And he is not, I'm sorry, but he is not the kind of Democrat we need going forward. Give me a dozen Chris Murphys from Connecticut, the guy who will say, why aren't we fighting? Why aren't we organizing? Why aren't we plotting what we're going to do? What's wrong with us? Let's get going, folks. Give me Chris Murphy, and you can keep Adam Schiff.
Yeah, that's what I expected. I expected it when I heard. I just turned the volume up and then heard that. I was like, oh my God! I just turned it down again. I'm like, this is. He's got his hat in his hand already with Trump. So I mean, if you're cowed, if everybody's cowed by this lunatic, 4 years, Joan, 4 long years. Anyway, we made the weekend, but I'm serious. I don't know if these people are going to get these vaccination rates. I don't know if they're up or down, but. Something is not right. Anyway, Joan, thanks for taking my call, Joan. Thank you.
Thanks for the call.
Thank you, Joan.
And let's go back to the phone lines. Our good friend Dave from Hoffman Estates is on the line. Hello, how are you today, my friend?
Hey, Joan, happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Two things before I get into what I was going to talk to you about. As a veteran, I'm very worried about Pete Hegseth getting passed. Mm-hmm. There's such trouble there, and other veterans should be just as much worried. And then when you're talking about the incompetent thing, I was going to talk about that on Lighting Strike yesterday, but it couldn't get through on that one. He stepped all over and just says go to Facebook. Well, that's okay. I don't bother you no more. But anyway, then fires, Trump will just pull out that magic Sharpie again and circle around them and stuff like the hurricane,
Hey, I wonder if we dropped some nuclear bombs, if that would stop the fires.
Yeah.
It makes sense
like
to me.
What,
and by the way, Hegseth has his hearing tomorrow in D.C. at, it's 9:30. I don't know if that's, I think that's 9:30 Eastern time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
maybe Trump will do like the one guy did in, what was it, when they blew off the bombs to stop the oil fires over in Iraq, was it, or Kuwait? I think it was Kuwait during the war. They blew off bombs and stuff like that to snuff out the oxygen and stuff like that. There's a guy who's from Texas. He was real big on that.
Red Adair. Isn't that the guy you're talking about, Red Adair?
Yes.
He used to be the one they would call every time there was an oil, a derrick, a rig fire, or an oil well fire. Red Adair would always show up.
Yep, that's the guy I was thinking. And the story I was reading earlier today, talking about, with the reservoirs and that being low. Check this story out. It was billionaire couple Linda and Stuart Resnick own a massive share of the state's water system, largely seized in a series of secretive meetings from about 2 decades, 20 years ago.
They own tons and tons and tons of farmland, and through various deals that they've struck, they basically own most of the water.
Yeah. I said, and that water is paid for by the very taxpayers where these billionaires are holding hostage. Urban water systems are desperate for
Gavin
water.
Newsom has already said that, yes, we're going to continue the recovery effort, but there also needs to be an investigation because there was one reservoir that supposedly was unavailable to firefighters, and I'm not quite sure if it was a mechanical unavailability or whether there simply wasn't any water in the reservoir. But he's already said, there are some things that are that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can worry about putting out the fires and helping people, but also know that we're going to have to look into some of what happened and how it happened.
Yeah, because in the story it was saying that in 2023 it said they received just 5% of what they requested from the state, where the Stuart and Linda Resnick use 150 billion with a B gallons a year.
Yeah,
nearly half of Americans buy at least one of their products.
Yeah,
their pistachios, their pomegranate juice, their mandarins.
Well, you know, that's the other thing. A lot of our farm crops come from California. So it's going to be very interesting. I would fully expect food prices to go up because of this. Oh, Dave, we got to get to a break. Thank you so much for the call.
I touch base with you on that one. I thought you might find that of interest. All right, have a good one.
We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more of your calls, texts, and more of what Joe Biden had to say today right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Dave and I were just talking about some of the reporting that has surrounded the fires in L.A. The death toll is now 24. It is expected to rise from there. Part of the problem is that fires can reignite. That actually is one theory of how the first fire started. There were some fireworks that started a small blaze on top of a hill on New Year's Eve. And I didn't know this, not being a student of these kind of fires, but apparently even after a fire is put out, somehow within days or even a week or two, the fires can reignite. And I don't understand the mechanism of it, but it's apparently a scientifically established thing. And some people are saying that the LA Fire Department, anytime there's any kind of fire like that, they should have people assigned to continuing to check it every day. Because, again, these fires can reignite, and it is, some people believe that hilltop fire that was caused by New Year's Eve fireworks that was extinguished, that hilltop fire reignited, and that was the start of the Pacific Palisades fire. There's also, as is any time there's a situation like this, there are people who are willing to take advantage of it. There has been some looting. I know one person who lost their home completely. She and her husband and their toddler moved in with a friend of mine. When they were given the evacuation order, they went back to find that their house had burned. They went back a second time to find that their valuables, what valuables were left, had been looted. And then their house caught fire again. It reignited. This is the gift that keeps on giving and is going to continue. It's so much of this is dependent on the winds. There have been extremely strong winds. Initially, some of the areas experienced 80 to 100 mile an hour winds. And that's what's blowing the embers and starting new fires. And the misinformation, a lot of people have written articles over the weekend about how normally when we have a disaster of this magnitude in the past, Americans have set aside our differences and pulled together to help. Now, I do believe there is a lot of that going on in California. But on the national scale, MAGAs and Republicans are using this to score political points, claiming that somehow Democrats are the reason why these fires are there, and Democrats are the reason why the fires are burning nonstop. Nothing to do with, the fact that there wasn't any rain and that there was a freak weather, a high pressure, low pressure, side by side that created a wind tunnel in between them. No, Democrats. It's just really, it is really a low point in our political life. I have lived in this country my entire life, many decades. And I hope where we are right now is some sort of fluke, because I don't like what I see. I don't like who we are right now. I really don't. You know, Ray used to joke all the time. Well, not actually joke. He used to say, you know, we got to leave this country. I don't, you know, and I would always be like, no, we've had rough times before. We'll always come back. And I do believe we will. I'm just not sure I'm going to live long enough to see it, because it just seems like we are in such a terrible place. Again, the people who are in California right now, you know, they are pulling together. They're trying to, the woman who lost her house and found her valuables looted. Like I said, she moved in temporarily with a friend of mine, but through donations, she and her husband have been able to find a rental house that they can move into. People are helping, but too many people with a megaphone are using this to gain political points, and I think that's awful. That's shameful. One thing that has been one of the sources of misinformation, estimates are that as many as 30% of the people fighting the fires are incarcerated people. And there's been a lot of misinformation about how they're being treated and forced to do things. And I thought this was really interesting, and I'm going to take a couple of seconds to read this. This guy posted on social media, I'm a former incarcerated firefighter. I served in a California fire camp from 2009 to 2012. Misinformation is a fire on the internet. So here are facts about the prison firefighter program. Incarcerated firefighters, and they're called wildland firefighters because they have a specific set of training. They create fire breaks. They're the ones that go in with shovels, you know, when the fire is moving and you know you can't just simply douse it. You'll clear an area of land so that when the fire gets to it, it hopefully stops and doesn't jump across the fire break. So they spend their time doing fire breaks. They receive between $5.80 and $10.24 per day. They receive an extra $1 an hour when working on an emergency incident. They earn additional time-served credits and are paroled earlier. This person who did this post said he went home 18 months earlier. They are eligible to have their criminal records expunged after coming home. It's a voluntary assignment. Nobody is forced to do it. They also get enough training that they're eligible to apply to Forest Service for firefighting jobs after they're released. They don't live in prison. They live outside of prison. They don't return to prison after the fire is over. There are no armed guards in fire camps. They have exercise facilities that they use. He says incarcerated wildland firefighters who've lived in fire camp for some time typically parole with sizable amounts of money relative to other prisoners. They eat good and plentiful food for standard meals. They get steak and rib meals during and after incidents, and they have a sense of purpose. Shifts of 24 hours are typical, though they can be longer if there's an extreme circumstance. And, of course, during that 24-hour shift, depending upon what's going on, meals are sometimes sporadic. Showers aren't available. But he said at the completion of a 24-hour shift, there is typically 24 hours fully paid of rest at a base camp. And he goes on and on. His name is, his post is Han Scratch. His name, I think, is, I forget his name. It might be George Han. Basically, this program caused him to earn money, get released earlier, get his record expunged. And you can't, not everybody's allowed to do this. If you're convicted of a serious crime like murder or rape or something like that, you don't get out there on the fire lines. Minimum security people only. They can't have any outstanding warrants, or they can't have any disciplinary actions against them. They really do take the cream of the crop. And that's one of the things that there has been some misinformation about, like somehow this is some sort of chain gang kind of thing. And also, by the way, in case you're wondering how this man got to be incarcerated, he is now clean, but he had a problem with drug addiction. And he burgled a house and stole a safe. When he opened the safe, he found pictures. He found pictures of the homeowner abusing children. And so he turned himself in with the evidence, knowing full well that if he did that, he was going to go to jail. But he couldn't abide the thought that this guy was abusing children. So there you go. Let's go back to the phone lines. Our good friend Earl is on the line from Hyde Park. Hey, Earl, how are you today?
Hi, Joan. I'm doing pretty good. Cold, but I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, really? Yeah. We're having a cold one. Do you remember when we've had Januaries? When we've had Januaries where it hit 70 degrees? I vaguely remember that happening not that long ago.
Well, we still may have them, but with this climate change situation, we are going to be in for a wild ride from here on out, and we don't know what we're going to get in the wintertime.
Yeah.
We really don't. And I don't want to start talking about the, prevailing winds and get all, put your, rest of your audience to sleep about ramifications of Nino and all that other stuff, the trade winds and stuff. So I'm not going to go there. But the weather is very complicated, and anybody can tell you exactly what's going to happen with certainty. That's not true, because the scientists are still learning every day. There are things that are still happening that you can't predict. And we up here, and do you know that they're projecting that Chicago will be under the target for Tornado Alley in a relatively time-wise short period of time, because the climate is warming up, and the more you warm up, the higher up the tornado window is going to go higher and higher. So pretty soon Chicago will be under the eye of tornadoes that we may be seeing in Kansas and Oklahoma. So, I mean, I don't want to go there. The reason why I called in was, I'm going to say something that you and your audience are not going to like.
Uh-oh.
Probably. Yeah, button down the hatches. But we need really responsible government and a population that will heed the recommendations of a responsible government. I'm not talking about Trump and his regime and the people that are backing them, because they're not responsible. They're only in self-interest in furthering their own careers and filling their pockets. But we need to have legislation where we have standards for building homes that won't burn as easily as what we have now. Like in Miami, we have standards for windows that have to stand up to 150-mile-an-hour winds, and that's not sufficient now, because they're saying hurricanes and tornadoes can reach 200 and 300 mile an hour winds.
Well, that's part of the problem with what's going on. We've with our warming climate, it means our weather is more and more extreme, and that's not going to change. So you're right. Standards that might have been perfect 20 years ago aren't going to cut it now. And, you know, the worst part, Earl, is that insurance companies decide that places like Florida and California, we have to pay out too much. That's too expensive. We're not going to insure anybody in those states anymore. It's a bad situation.
All the way around, because the people are stuck. You know, once you buy into those. Let me give you, I think, an example that your audience may remember. I think your audience may remember that a building collapsed down near Miami Beach. And the reason why it collapsed was from years of neglect and water damage. And so because of the seawater and everything, it eroded the foundation and the building came down. Well, at the time that it was built, we didn't have those kind of standards that would have prevented this type of damage.
Yeah.
And
well, so many of those homes that are on the coast are falling into the water. I mean, as the ocean levels rise, the ocean is reclaiming that coastal land. Some of the people who've lost their houses don't even have enough land to rebuild.
Yeah, on the West Coast, yeah. But over on the East Coast, it's just the fact that the water is reclaiming the land, and unfortunately, the people in that high rise that collapsed back into the ocean, the people couldn't afford to make the renovations needed to keep it from falling because they knew that it was in bad disarray.
Mm-hmm.
But the people that had been living there didn't have the finances to fix the problem. And that is a problem all across our country. All across.
Earl, I'm going to have to interrupt you. I got to get to a break.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the call.
No problem.
We're going to take a quick break and be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are taking your calls and talking about the news of the day. There are now 24 confirmed dead in the LA fires, a figure that is only going to increase. President Biden made a speech about his foreign policy accomplishments this afternoon. And a lot of people are commenting on the text line on these things. I'll share some of that in a little bit. But first, I want to go back to the phone lines to Franklin Park. Alan is on the line. Hello, Alan. Thank you for the call today.
Hi, Joan. I just wanted to call regarding collective action that we can take right now regarding the Senate hearings, and that we should be calling and showing our disapproval, especially in places where there are where we have Republican congressmen, but even for our own, senators, even for our own. And I was going to bring up ECM from Resistance Live. It does a podcast every day during the week on YouTube. And if you look up Resistance Live, and at 10 and a half minutes into her broadcast today, she talks about this and how we should handle that. And with that, I got to make my phone call to my senators, just saying thank you. I know that we both have we have Democratic ones here, but I guess it's still good to, the more people that call, the better. I mean, we should be flooding those phone lines right now.
And always, that's one of the lessons that I learned a few years ago when I was always patting myself on the back that I voted and wasn't I a good citizen. And I didn't pay attention in between votes. And you're absolutely right. I read, I forget which activist newsletter this came from, but somebody wrote, if you are not calling your either state senator, state rep, your congressperson, your senator, your governor's office, if you are not calling someone at least once a week to weigh in on an issue, you are not doing your job. And that is what, I must admit, I'm not a once a weeker, and it is what I aspire to and what I would like to be. But you make a perfect point. We have to be in it every day.
And especially today and tomorrow for at least right now for these confirmation hearings. And it's just that's something that we have to be doing collectively now.
Yes. Alan, thank you so much for the call. Very, very good point. Let's go to our good friend Ron, who's on the line from Chicago. Hello, Ron. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Yes, I heard on the news that Trump has about 100 executive orders he's going to sign on Monday.
Ooh, 100. Ooh, I hadn't heard that large a number. Though, frankly, when I heard 20 or 30, that was about a month ago. So God only knows they've probably been stacking up since then.
Oh, yeah. Some are going to be executive pardons. Some are going to reverse executive orders from President Biden. So, and who knows what else.
Yeah. President Biden is, and I've been pleased to read this, he is changing rules and doing things so that some of Trump's stated goals are going to be much more difficult for him to accomplish. Biden, I was just reading, and I don't have the detail on this, but there were certain things having to do with immigrants, and there were certain procedures and policies and rules that his administration was changing, which will make it more difficult for Donald Trump to try to start instituting the mass deportations that he's promised. So let's hope that our government agencies are shoring themselves, trying to protect themselves for what's coming, because we all know what's coming.
Yeah, and the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, I don't remember his name, a couple weeks ago he was saying about the cabinet nomination that, I'll just have to wait and see, and we'll get the facts. And now he's saying that he's going to do everything he can to push through the nominations. So.
Thune? Thune said that?
I don't know the name of the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. Sure. Is that his name?
John Thune is the is the majority head in the Senate. Well, it's really interesting because what Thune said earlier was that some of the lesser positions, like who's head of the Labor Relations Board, that he was not so concerned about those, but that he did feel that cabinet level positions definitely needed to be subject to hearings. And there's a woman who writes a newsletter. It's called Shiro, as in hero with an S. And let's see, was this today or yesterday? Today, she published a list of exactly who is going to be at a hearing this week. Doug Collins, Trump's pick to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs, is appearing before the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pete Hegseth, of course, is in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee tomorrow at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. Doug Burgum is going to be testifying tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central Time. He's the pick for Interior Secretary. He's going to be appearing before the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. And then on Wednesday, Kristi Noem, the dog shooter, is going to be appearing before the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to testify. Pam Bondi, who is Trump's choice to be Merrick Garland, is going to appear before the Judiciary Committee twice, Wednesday and Thursday. Marco Rubio is going to be, he's up for Secretary of State. He's going to be appearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Wednesday at 9 a.m. Central. And the list goes on and on and on and on. There are at least, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Looks like there are at least 15 hearings scheduled in front of various committees for tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday. So we will see. We will see. Some people have speculated that Hegseth, his committee hearing was scheduled for, it's 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central, in part because it's believed that there's going to be a lot of, as they say, fireworks, and that it's hoped that Hegseth's hearing distracts from Burgum's hearing, which is set to start a half hour later, and that then Burgum will get a pass and not get the same kind of media scrutiny that he otherwise would, because everybody is going to be reporting on what happened with Hegseth. So who knows? We will see how things stack out.
Right. And also, we should have expected this from the media and Republicans. They're spreading the story that the fires in California were started by a undocumented migrant from Mexico.
Oh, God.
He used it.
And it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, what has come out of this? The people who are taking advantage of the situation, it's really disgusting. It's really disgusting. By the way, one of our texters texted in that some of and I don't understand how these systems work, but some of the problem of fire hydrants not producing enough water, they say that electricity is needed to power the system that keeps the water pressurized. And once the power went out, that resulted in a lack of pressure, that it wasn't a lack of water in some instances, it was a lack of electricity. I don't understand the mechanics of how these things work, so until I know otherwise, I'm going to assume that person knows what they're talking about more than me. Anyway, Ron, thanks for the call. I got to get to the news. We are going to take a break for news. We are going to be back right after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am very pleased to be joined by famous radio host, political science professor William Muck, also co-host of the podcast called Politics Lab. Hello, my fellow radio host. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. So good to chat with you, Joan. Thanks for that. That was a great introduction.
Well, we can. I'll have Andy send you a clip. I know he sent you a clip when I got that call last week, and Myrna, I think it was her name, was just going on and on about what an amazing host you were and how incredible the show was and that you're just so interesting.
Well, it was very sweet of her to say that. And I will say, I've absolutely just loved filling in for you, Joan. The radio is just such a wonderful medium for conversation. I'm in the classroom obviously a lot, and I do some TV stuff, but I've grown to love the radio. It's just this wonderful space for kind of organic conversation. It's very, very addicting.
Yeah. Yeah. It is really, I found when I started doing this show that there was a part of my brain that apparently had been asleep for about 10 or 15 years, that all of a sudden it woke up and was like, wait a minute, I'm back online. I have to think again, and I have to formulate cogent responses again. Oh, my goodness, it's been a while.
No, there's true. That's the thing. Listeners don't appreciate how hard this is and how good you are at it, right? I mean, because to go for 3 hours and think and engage and have your brain humming like that, it's fun, but it's a real challenge.
Well, maybe one of these days we can get you in here for a whole week, and you can really get a taste of it.
Yes, yeah. No, that's the next level.
Yeah. So, this world we live in that is already politically very chaotic, and I think this is the calm before the storm. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's hard. I mean, just think about all the chaos that has been introduced just over the last few weeks, knowing that Trump is coming into the presidency. I mean, all the silliness, all the chaos and the distractions, and he's not even in power yet. No, I think you're spot on. It's hard to know if it's going to look like the first administration or different and worse. And I anticipate it's going to be worse because they've got experience now. They actually have people that know what they're doing. So, yes, I think it is the calm before the storm. And I think those first couple weeks, we're just going to get whacked because they're going to want to start quickly and, executive orders, deportations. I think our heads are going to be spinning those first few days and weeks.
I also think that, Donald Trump is not book smart, but he is street smart. Mm-hmm. And unless in the back of his mind he's trying to figure out a way to become a dictator and just suspend the Constitution and stay president for life, if he admits that the system is going to spit him out in 4 years and that he will be done, I think he's got to be thinking about getting as much done as quickly as possible. Because here's what I suspect. Maybe not the lunatics in Congress, but after the midterm elections, when he can't do as much damage, I think at the very least we're going to see Republicans in the Senate start to disagree with him and not vote the way he wants them to vote and do the things that are necessary for their constituents and their own political life. I've actually heard speculation to that effect that, at least the first year that maybe everybody's just going to bow down and say, oh, you're so brilliant, let's do whatever you want. And then maybe in the second year it might ease off a little bit. But after the midterms, when he can't threaten the same way that, he would if he were going to continue to be in power, the speculation is that after the midterms, we might see some Republican rebellion. Do you think that's wishful thinking?
That's what I'm wishing for, Joan. That's where I want to be. No, and it's a really, really important point, and it will give us a sense of what the post-Trump era is going to look like. And I think there's a couple pathways, and one is where the Republican Party reclaims the party itself from Donald Trump. I think that's easier said than done, but I hope that's the case. We would benefit from a more conventional, less chaotic, less Trumpified Republican Party. My fear is that Donald Trump will be doing things in the first 2 years, but even in those second 2 years, to benefit himself, both financially, politically. And I do wonder, what does it look like after Trump? Does he just go away and say, okay, the Republican Party gets to pick the next leader, the next president, all of that? Or is he going to try to control that process? I mean, does he say, hey, I want Don Jr. to be the nominee? So I think you're absolutely right. We need to be looking at that period 2 years from now, post midterms. It's likely that the midterms are going to hit the Republican Party's hard. That's sort of what we've seen past. So where is the Republican Party in that period afterwards? And if it kind of creates some space between themselves and Trump, I think that's a good sign that maybe there will be a post-Trump world. But I still, it may be wishful thinking, but that's what I'm absolutely hoping for.
I've talked to some people who say Trump is a once-in-a-lifetime politician and that there is not really going to be any kind of deep, strong MAGA without him. And I've heard other people say that he's been around so long and MAGA has been around so long that inevitably it will continue after the demise of Donald Trump. Which camp are you in?
I do think MAGA sticks around after Trump. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I don't think, if it's Ron DeSantis, I think it's a very different kind of dynamic. You know, my biggest fear in all of this is that we see the family, right? So we see Don or somebody else where Trump tries to do that. And that's what we see, you know, in dictatorships and authoritarian systems around the world. The only one you can trust is your family. So that's, you know, that's the, and I people push back when I say that, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to install a family member just as a way of protecting himself in this sort of this period as well. Because he's all self-interested. Yeah.
Two things, though. His daughter-in-law, the one that's married to Eric, Laura, wanted to be the one to replace Marco Rubio in the Senate. She wanted to be the senator from Florida. And she made an announcement last week that after a lot of thought and consultation with her family, she's decided to withdraw her name. And a lot of people took that to mean that Ron DeSantis, who is, of course, going to fill that seat, said, "No way, Jose, not you, baby," right, and gave her a way to save face. Eric and Don Jr., you know, this isn't Rupert Murdoch and his favorite son, Lachlan. You know, you may not like what they believe, but nobody thinks that Lachlan is an idiot or a flunky. Lachlan is like a mini-me when it comes to Rupert. And, you know, but I don't think Eric or Don Jr. are going to inspire anybody to think that they've got the wit and the intelligence to hold any kind of real job. And the only one I think who might come close is Jared Kushner, but yeah, he's got a good life. He's sitting on billions of dollars that his good friend right. MBS gave him. You know, he's making hundreds of millions of dollars in fees, despite the fact that his hedge fund hasn't made any money.
Right.
And, you know, Ivanka apparently has decided that she just wants to fade away. Shortly after the Biden election, she made the announcement that she no longer wants people to use Trump as her last name. She wants to be known as Ivanka Kushner. So I don't see, I mean, those are the only two that I think have enough charisma, if you can call it that, or seem to have enough sense that anybody would rally around, but not the boys, for God's sake. Donald Trump doesn't even like them.
No, Don Jr. is the only one that I think has the potential. But you said the right word, charisma, right? I mean, there's something, as much as I think Trump is a existential threat to democracy, he does have this sort of charismatic hold on the country. And there's something about this cult of personality that he has created. And when political parties or political systems get tied to somebody, where it really is to the great leader, to that charismatic individual, it's hard to move on afterwards. And so again, this is a real challenge for the Republican Party. Where do they go? Because if they move totally away from MAGA, that base that has been voting for them, they'll be disinterested. You don't get to go back to, I mean, you're not going back to the old school Republican Party. It really is going to be a fascinating time for the Republicans. What comes next and what does it look like? And I don't see a real clear pathway. And again, that's hoping that Trump goes away in 4 years. And I still don't say that's not a guarantee. I mean, I am not convinced that he won't try to do something to stick around.
Okay, what about J.D. Vance? He seems like a very ambitious young man. I've already made the joke that, you know, Donald Trump ought to post a Secret Service agent outside his bedroom. You know, otherwise J.D. Vance is going to sneak up to the second floor of the White House and do him in overnight. I just think that man is very eager to be in the halls of power. I can't see him standing by and watching Don Jr. get anointed. Can you really? Can you?
No, I think they will. I think he and DeSantis are sort of similar political characters that way, where they're biding their time and they think they should be president. I do wonder whether whether the MAGA supporters are as enthusiastic about either a J.D. Vance or a DeSantis, right? I mean, they're sort of replicas of Trump, but they're not the real thing. They're the knockoff band. And again, that's the really interesting question is, nobody can replicate Donald Trump. And DeSantis, he tried. I mean, he tried to look like
Trump. He tried to out-Trump Trump.
Yes, but people want the real thing, and again, Joan, I don't understand why, but they do, and so that'll be a really, really interesting dynamic to see how does this play out, and does Trump anoint somebody? He's going to want to play a role in all of this. I can't just see him going away quietly. So, I mean, it's going to be wonderful and chaotic political theater when that all starts to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Right now, if people are saying J.D. Vance is a mini-me when it comes to Trump. J.D. Vance is also very connected to all the tech bro money. DeSantis and Trump have had a very contentious relationship. Do you see them burying the hatchet? Do you think Ron DeSantis is going to be offered any kind of position in the Trump administration? And since all the big jobs have been spoken for, I can't imagine what that would be.
Well, but you got to remember, these people that are all in the big jobs now, they probably got 6 months and then they're going to be fired. I mean, the first administration, it was a circus of people coming in and out. So there's likely going to be openings. And then, so there will be space for DeSantis. Now, the problem is if DeSantis takes that, it's inevitable that he will also be fired, right? I mean, I'm sure Trump is just salivating at the idea of bringing DeSantis in. I mean, remember Mitt Romney? Remember that dynamic where Mitt eventually went in and kissed the ring and then Trump says, sorry, I don't need you. I mean, I think we're going to see a similar dynamic.
Humiliated him, made him suck up to Trump, made him meet with Trump, thinking he was going to be offered a big job. And then it was like, you know what, Mitt? I don't think so.
Yes. And so if I'm DeSantis, I don't take that anything Trump offers, but I think he will. If he offers him something down the road of defense or something like that, I think DeSantis takes it. He's in there for 6 months. He gets fired. And then what do? Then you're no longer governor of Florida, right? I mean, Trump is a wrecking ball for everybody around him. All of their careers are going to be killed if they stay close to him. I just don't understand why they continue to come back and kiss the ring.
I don't get that either. I really don't. I want to talk more about this. Why, despite the trail of devastation that Trump has clearly left in his wake, why there still seem to be more lemmings willing to jump in. Professor William Muck, political science professor William Muck, and I are going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by North Central College political science professor William Muck. We were talking about the fact that there is so much personal and professional destruction, humiliation suffered by the people who try to align themselves with Trump and do his bidding. And yet it seems like there is a never-ending supply of people willing to continue to take those roles. And I've always wondered, is it that they think for some reason it can't or it won't happen to them? Or do they just figure that they're going to, maybe get their profile out in a national or an international way, and even if it doesn't go well in the long run, they now will have this name recognition that maybe down the road they can do something with? I'm trying. I have tried. I've spent way too much time on this trying to figure out why this happens. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you highlighted two really good reasons why they drift in. The allure of power is so seductive. And I think you're absolutely right. They're thinking, I can be in a presidential cabinet. I can have this role, and I'll be the one who can avoid all of this. And even if I am fired, then I'm connected. People know me. I can do consulting, so there's probably a financial side to all of it. But I think in their heads, they think this is a stepping stone to greatness, that they're going to be the next presidential candidate. They're going to be the next star. But I was thinking, as you're talking about this, I was thinking about Trump's cabinet and all of those individuals from the first term. They all are worse off for that relationship. I mean, think about Nikki Haley. Think about, any of the people at state or defense or attorney generals. All of them are in a much worse situation because they hitched their wagon to the Trump train. So it's really bizarre. I mean, you think about a guy like Vladimir Putin. He brings these individuals in close to him, but they benefit. He makes them rich. Donald Trump doesn't make them rich. He just exploits them and kicks them to the side.
Look at Rudy Giuliani.
Yes,
just gone back to court again. Rudy Giuliani is losing everything. Everything.
Yes. It's irrational, right? When you think about this, I mean, it's one thing to cozy up to a dictator who's going to give you benefits, right? Financial benefits, power, all of those things. I get that. That's a sort of a rational human action. But with Donald Trump, you know what it's going to look like, and it's not good. You're not going to be rich. You're probably going to be having to hire lawyers to stay out of jail. If you're Rudy Giuliani, you have to sell everything. I mean, it's just such a disgrace. We will look back 50 years, 100 years from now and wonder what in the world was going on? What were Americans thinking electing this guy? What were those individuals who sucked up to him? What were they thinking? All of this we're going to spend decades trying to figure all of this out.
Yeah. And I mean, even somebody who had stature and wealth that he didn't lose. I'm thinking Rex Tillerson. Everybody was like, Rex Tillerson, oh my God. Right. And regardless of the fact that he still, I'm sure, has tons of money and lives a very nice life, he's going to be forever known as the guy who was fired by text while he was on the toilet, in the plane. Right. I mean, come on. When I think Rex Tillerson, I imagine him sitting there with like world-class diarrhea, holding his phone and learning that he's just been fired. I mean, sorry, Rex, but you did that to you.
Right, and wondering and reflecting on the bad choices that he has made, right? I mean, and the other thing, it's not just the financial and the legal hit, but also the idea that you have to worry about your security. So anybody who served with Donald Trump, who actually spoke out against him, Trump turns the mob on them. And so you have to, hire security or worry about your own personal safety. I mean, all of these things suggest that you should steer clear of a Trump administration. Now, I do think we're going to see a very, very different type of cabinet this time around. It's going to be the sycophants. We're going to see people who are going to agree with Donald Trump, and they're going to do everything they can to try to avoid any kind of confrontation. And that may work out better for them. I think there's going to be a different philosophical approach to those around Trump this time. And maybe they'll stick around a little longer, but Trump gets bored with everybody. It's a ticking time bomb before he and Elon blow up. I mean, that one's not going to last more than a few months.
Yeah, well, he's already published Trump published one statement about, I love Elon, Elon's great, but, he really needs to learn how to stay in his own lane.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. And as more and more people start talking about Elon pulling the strings, the number one thing Trump wants is attention. And Elon has the biggest megaphone in the world. I mean, he has his Twitter or X or whatever to push back. And I think that'll come center stage as well as these two start to play, actually govern. I
was just thinking about the people who were with Trump in his first administration. Jeff Sessions, who loved Trump, who believed in Trump, and, was destroyed by Trump, was fired by Trump because he dared recuse himself from something that he had no business being a part of. Oops. Oh, sorry, Mr. Trump. You didn't tell me that I was supposed to break the law. I'm sorry. I guess I didn't hear that part of the job. Right. I think it's going to be a clown cabinet. Unfortunately, it is still going to be a cabinet that wields power. And I think that this next year is going to be worse than anything we've experienced, anything that I've experienced in my lifetime. And I don't know how to prepare for that. I don't know I'm trying to work on resilience and perseverance, and, maybe it won't be the one extreme, march where there's 100,000 people, but rather a day-to-day struggle to protect the things you care about. What are you thinking about the next 4 years or the next year? Let's shorten it. Next year.
No, because I think the danger this time around is more grave, right? Because he's more bitter. Trump is more bitter. He's more angry. He's out for vengeance. So the first time around, he was surprised to be president. This time, he knows what he wants to do. He surrounded himself with people who are going to do his bidding, and so it's clear we can have a sense of what that's all going to look like. I do think since the election, there's been a sense of, I think, disconnection among a lot of liberals and Democrats where they feel like I don't understand the country I'm in. And I think people have pulled away, and I understand that. You can only handle so much. My sense, though, is once Trump is back in power and we start to see these policies and things that are being implemented, I think there will be people who are going to want to push back and push back hard. Right? I think that people will once again be mobilized to say, we want to fight for democracy. I think we're just in a moment right now where everybody is tired and disillusioned, and it was that election weighed heavily on a lot of people, and I had a lot of friends and family who said, I just need to check out for a little while. I can't do this anymore. But I think they'll be coming back, like you said, once we start seeing the clown show, once we start seeing mass deportations, once we start seeing, some of the policies that are going to hit people in really meaningful ways. I think people are going to say this is not okay. So I think the democracy will rise up and push back, Joan.
Yeah, I think so, too. And I think a lot of people, and by a lot of people, I mean me, really thought that after we elected Joe Biden that we had put all this nonsense in the rearview mirror. And I know that, there were a lot of things stacked against Kamala Harris, but I just thought that I really did honestly believe that she was going to win. And I just sort of feel I'll fight. I will definitely stand up and fight, but I sort of feel like I got the wind knocked out of me a little bit.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about Jimmy Carter, who, of course, recently passed away at the age of 100, our 39th president. We'll be back. William Muck and I will be back with more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by political science professor and WCPT fill-in radio host William Muck. We've been talking about what is coming in the very near future politically, but the death of Jimmy Carter caused me and a lot of people to spend some time looking back on Jimmy Carter and what politics was like then. What went through your mind? What did you think about in the wake of Jimmy Carter's death?
Well, it was just such a really interesting moment because when a president dies, there's obviously a lot of attention paid to it. And so a number of radio stations and TV outlets were playing old clips and interviews of Jimmy Carter. And I found myself listing some of these longer interviews, when he talked for 45 minutes or 50-minute interviews. And I was sort of shocked at how the memory of Jimmy Carter I had in my head versus listening to him. And it struck me that he was more thoughtful, more engaging. As I was listening back, and it led to this rabbit hole where I was listening to more and more interviews. Like I was trying to remember Jimmy Carter more and think more about his policies. And it struck me he was an entirely different president than we remember. We talk about him as sort of a weak and ineffective president who then became a wonderful post-president. But I think there was a depth and thoughtfulness to Jimmy Carter that is worth more conversation. Hearing him talk about climate change in the 80s or writing about this or talking about the separation of church and state in really thoughtful ways. His thoughts about lying and being truthful and being honest with the American public, it sort of just rattled me how the depth of Jimmy Carter. And I think it's really, especially as we are transitioning into a new administration where Donald Trump is the polar opposite of Jimmy Carter in terms of being honest with the American public and understanding the way the world works. I feel like we could use a little more Jimmy Carter right now. And I guess I wish we would spend more time kind of thinking about Jimmy Carter.
I had the exact same reaction. I went to YouTube. I pulled up some of his speeches. I read, some of the comments made by people who worked with him and knew him. And, people were saying, if Jimmy Carter had gotten a second term, we would have been ahead of the curve when it comes to climate change. You're right. He was prescient. And that speech that he gave, it's generally referred to as the malaise speech, but he titled it a crisis of confidence. Yeah. It was like he says in the speech, I was going to talk to you about energy. And, back then there were lines. People were worried they were going to run out of gas, and they were lined up. And he said, but I realized that there's a bigger issue here. And he talked about our attitudes, our beliefs, the way we were thinking about things. He took a step back from here's the actual news of the day, and let's take a step back. Why are we there? Why do we think the way we think? What is it that we're missing? What is it that we need to do better? I was blown away. I mean, I sat and, usually I'm like, we got to grab a clip, got to get going. I sat there and listened to the whole speech, and I was like, I don't remember this guy that way at all. Now, admittedly, I'm older than you, so I should remember more about Jimmy Carter. But, I remember, again, the idea that he was a really good man, but that he wasn't very good politically. I'm not so sure that's right.
No, I 100% had the same reaction where I thought I was just going to listen to a couple minutes, and I found myself pulled in because of the depth of the ideas he was using. And that so-called malaise speech, we never see politicians doing that, where they're honest with the American people. In that speech, he talked about hyper-consumerism and that our identity as a people has become too tied to materialism, to buying things. I thought, my goodness, there's no politician today who would dare suggest that Americans should think about their consumption habits and maybe buying more, maybe going to Amazon. Maybe that's not the right answer. Maybe we should rethink who we are as human beings. And that, all of that is so thoughtful and honest, and it's a hard conversation. And I wish more presidents would have those conversations, but we don't, right? The political system doesn't. It sort of punishes that right now, where we say, no, don't tell us we can't have more. And Jimmy Carter is just so refreshing in this moment right now. Same thing. I found myself wanting more and wanting to hear more of his views on topics and issues that we're still grappling with today. Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that I know that you were paying attention to that I kind of want to switch gears a little bit. I have a couple of folks who come on once a month, and we do a media segment where we evaluate how various news organizations and how various reporters are doing, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, what we need to pay attention to. And we actually did an emergency media session after Mark Zuckerberg announced that Meta was going to kind of really pretty much move away from content moderation. In other words, that on Instagram and on Threads and on Facebook, if you hate gay people and you want to spew vile rhetoric, that's going to be okay. That is, or, if you hate black people. But when it comes to immigration, when it comes to LGBTQ, he said, he realized that there was just too much. There was too much of this moderation, which, of course, he no longer calls moderation. Now he calls it censorship. And then he did that. Donald Trump praised him for doing that. And then he donated money to the Trump inauguration. And then he went down to Mar-a-Lago, thought he would just get a bite to eat. Good God.
the people who are best able, the billionaires who would be best able to stand up to Trump are the ones who are all rolling over. Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg. You know, they're leaving it to us little guys to stand up and fight.
Yes. Yes, 100%. I mean, the owner of the LA Times, right, who's weighing in and putting his thumb down on the scales. You know, ABC, when they did the payout to Donald Trump, I think we're seeing across the board this
Bob Iger was, we can thank Bob Iger for that.
Yes, right. Absolutely. Where there's this fear out there. And this is the moment when you push back, right? You say, no, it's important to have independent, you know, facts matter, Joan. We know this, right? And truth matters. When Facebook Meta announced that decision that they were no longer going to fact check, it reminded me of all the way back in 2016 when Kellyanne Conway, after the inauguration, came out and said, well, we've got alternative facts. Remember, she used that phrase and everybody lost their mind to say, like, no, there are not alternative facts. Like, there are facts. And I think we've come full circle now. You know, this is a decision where we are embracing a post-truth, a post-fact world, and it terrifies me. I mean, you know, we can do good fact-checking, especially, you know, with the technological tools we have today. We can do this. We can do it in real time. News organizations around the country do it all of the time with integrity. And for Zuckerberg to come out and say, well, it's too much. You know, I just want to be a free speech absolutist. It's disingenuous. It's a mega makeover that he's going through, and it really, really bothers me.
It bothers me too. What are your students saying about all the things that you and I are talking about now?
You know, it's interesting. We were just talking about the TikTok ban this morning, and we were having that conversation. And you know, they said, like, hey, we use TikTok to get information. You know, this is important to us. This is a valuable, you know, social media for us. And I think in some ways, they are more savvy than us older generations, right? They understand. They grew up in a world.
To be more savvy than me is not a big stretch.
Well, but I mean, they understand that what's out there is, you know, it's complicated facts and misinformation and disinformation, and they go into that sort of understanding it. But I don't think they always appreciate the significance of it because it's just the reality that they've always known. I think some of us of slightly older generations where we've seen this transformation know the significance of it. I mean, it's sometimes hard to come down and determine truth, but the battle is worth it, right? And I think this is a dangerous moment that we're entering, especially when you think about Elon Musk with his megaphone and now Zuckerberg and Donald Trump. They're all sort of embracing this bro masculine, you know, mixed martial art mentality. And I think all of the media may start reflecting that if we don't start to push back a little bit more.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to very unfairly put you on the spot because this particular election, Donald Trump was not an unknown quantity. We knew how much he lied, how much he favored rich people when he was in the presidency before. And I guess that was part of the reason why I really thought Kamala Harris was going to win the election. But based on the votes, particularly male votes, particularly male blue-collar votes, they were like a silent majority who went to the polls and pulled the lever for Donald Trump. There are myriad reasons for that. There are myriad reasons why tens of millions of registered Democrats stayed home. But when we come back, I'd like to explore some of those reasons with you, some of the things that you've been thinking about. I'm talking to political science professor William Muck from North Central College. We are going to be right back after this.
Adopt, don't shop. This is Dr. Craig from Mark Drugs. We're proud to support WCPT's Pet of the Month, benefiting the Anti-Cruelty Society. Adopt, don't shop is the movement that promotes animal rescue over pet stores. Illinois has wisely outlawed pet stores, but many of those operators merely moved over the border to Indiana or Wisconsin. Their dogs largely come from inhumane puppy mills and live shorter lives with a myriad of health problems caused by overbreeding. I have several canine patients that are on an extensive regimen of medicines simply to extend their lives. I believe every dog deserves a loving home, proper nutrition, and a chance at a long, healthy life. In my experience, rescued mixed-breed dogs are the healthiest of all. So stop by the Anti-Cruelty Society location in the city or log on to their website to find your potential next family member. Or check out markdrugs.com to see this month's Pet of the Month. Remember, you have a choice when it comes to your health care, and a great choice is Mark Drugs in Deerfield and Roselle. Get better health and care for you and your pets.
Hey, Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by political science professor William Muck. There are lots of analyses going on right now about why so many registered Democrats stayed home in the presidential election, chose not to vote. There was this surprising Trump turnout of other folks, but largely a lot of blue-collar men that seemingly caught a lot of the analysts and pollsters by surprise. When you think about this last election, what would you say the top, depending on how loquacious you want to be, top 5 things that entered into this election? And feel free to touch on misogyny and racism if you feel those played a role.
Well, let's maybe start there. I think the number one variable we want to understand for this election really has to be the anti-incumbent sentiment that we've seen here and around the world. I think it explains so much. I honestly, when I step back and look at the campaign that Kamala Harris ran, I think it was a strong one. I think they made a lot of right decisions, and maybe you can critique it at the margins, but in general, it was a smart, energetic, positive campaign in a different environment. I think that campaign wins hands down. It reminded me of Obama. I mean, I think they just did a lot right, but they ran into this wave of anti-incumbent sentiment, hangover from COVID, inflation, all of that made it really, really difficult. So
throw the bums out. Just throw the bums out. Kind of, my life isn't the way I want it. My groceries cost too much. Let's throw the bums out and see what else shakes out. That would seem to be people who don't view Donald Trump as the existential threat to democracy that many of us do.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the realizations from this last election is that a lot of people, a huge chunk of this country, do not follow politics, do have low information, low engagement, and Donald Trump did wildly well with that group. The data is pretty clear. Like, if you paid attention to the news, if you followed politics, you were much, much more likely to vote for Kamala Harris. Same thing with education. If you have certain levels of education, much more likely to vote Democratic. Lower levels of education, lower levels of engagement with the political system, political knowledge, you are much more likely to vote Donald Trump. I mean, those dynamics are really sort of fascinating. But to where you started, misogyny, we have to talk about this, right? This was an election where men sort of pushed back, and that Trump did something that many of us didn't anticipate. He mobilized men of multiple different races and ethnicities to say, let's push back on this idea of woke and that we should be thinking more about diversification and DEI. I mean, he really did well with that demographic in a sort of simplistic but very, very hyper toxic masculine approach. And it worked, and it worked really, really well. And for many of us, it was disheartening, right? You don't want to see that. You don't want somebody to go up there and run on these, sometimes I would say more Neanderthal type campaigns, and it worked. And there's an appeal and there's an audience out there for that, and they showed up and voted. I mean, so I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that we live in a country that so many men see this as a good political choice. It rattled me, Joan. It absolutely did.
It absolutely rattled me too. I have one person in my regular life that I live who I know voted for Trump. And she and I don't talk about politics, but she happened to be telling a story about something else, and it came out that she was a Trump voter. And We didn't get into it, but she said, I'm a Republican. My whole family are Republicans. I've been a Republican my whole life. As if party mattered more than anything else. This is who I am. I mean, I'm a Democrat, but if there is a Democrat who doesn't seem to be up to the task and a Republican who is, I thought Mark Kirk, who was the Republican senator from Illinois for a while, I thought he was terrific. He was smart. He was well-spoken. He was a man of good character. I will have no problem crossing the aisle to vote for somebody like that. And yet I do think that there are people who can't move beyond who I'm a Republican. That's who I am. My family, they're all Republicans, always have been. And I didn't want to get into a discussion. I really didn't want to talk about politics with her, but I felt like saying, okay, and that means you would vote for a convicted sexual offender, a convicted felon, a man who lies, simply because you can't imagine voting for somebody who's not a Republican? I don't get that. I don't get that.
I think it's a way. So we face these sort of psychological pressures. And, for that individual, it probably would have been really difficult to vote for Kamala Harris for a whole bunch of reasons. And so we convince ourselves that Donald Trump isn't so bad, right? That he's really a Republican. We find excuses for voting for someone we know to not be worthy of that vote, right? I mean, I think about when Clinton was president and we're the Republican Party and the focus on the family and all those conversations about character and the criticisms of Bill Clinton for not having character and how important that was to the Republican Party. That's no longer part of that conversation. And so, I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance among Republicans now where they know they shouldn't be doing this, but it's just you take these shortcuts and say, you know what, I'm a Republican, that's what I'm doing. And yeah, it's really revealing, right? It's revealing, I think, a variety of different Republicans voted for different reasons. We were talking about the young angry men who are tired of change and diversity and talk of DEI. That's one segment. And there's others who just don't really want to go through the mental gymnastics of having those hard conversations. Should I be voting for somebody who's a convicted felon? Should I be voting for somebody who undermines the core tenets of my party, right? It's just hard to do that. And so many people have avoided those hard conversations.
One thing that I think is interesting, though, is this person is female. They have talked to me in the past about a desire to move to Florida, which seems a good choice for them. But she is also somebody who is of childbearing age, somebody who I know would love to be married or in a relationship. And does she not think about, what does all this mean for me? I move to Florida, I find somebody, I fall in love, I get married, I get pregnant, and in my second trimester, the pregnancy goes wrong. And then what? I either try to fly back to Illinois or I bleed to death in Florida? I mean, how do people not think about the implications of what they're doing? How does that not happen? What is wrong with us?
I mean, we can convince ourselves of we vote against our interests all of the time. I mean, I oftentimes think about, the federal money and support that goes to Medicare and all the programs in a lot of these red states. And one of the things they continue to argue for is less government programs, right? And a lot of those programs are providing, individuals could benefit from those programs. So we vote against our interests all of the time. As it relates to abortion, I really thought that would be a more central issue for mobilizing voters, and it didn't prove to have the same traction as inflation and other issues. And I also wonder, I think one of the undercurrents we're seeing is this pushback against change. The American democracy is going through all sorts of demographic change, political change. We're seeing women gets rights. We're having conversations about LGBTQ rights. And I think some of what we saw in this last election was people saying, I don't want any more change. I just don't want to see that. And I think some of that is just to
is
say,
that
I'm
my
tired
demographic?
Of that change.
Is that us old fart baby boomers? Is that our fault that we don't? It's too much change. We want things to be like they used to be. Seriously? Can you lay that at the feet of my demographic here?
I think some of it, right? So you see it as you get older, there definitely are higher numbers. I think a lot of it that goes back to the point of male voters as well, though. I think that's partly where it's coming from, where a lot of men say, I'm tired of this conversation. I don't want to change. I want to be who I was. I mean, think about Donald Trump, make America great again, right? He wants to pull you back, and he's telling all of these men, and like you said, in older generations, it's okay. You don't have to change. You don't have to think about trans rights or women's rights or, civil rights. Like, enough of that. I'll protect you so you don't have to have those hard conversations. And so for some demographics out there, that's appealing. And I think we saw that in this last election where people said, yeah, I want that guy. He's not going to make me think about people who might be suffering. He's just going to tell me that I'm the one who's suffering. I mean, those are, again, they're the sort of uncomfortable truths of the democracy these days.
So if this is the mindset that even people who really don't have it that bad somehow think that they've been cheated, that they didn't get their due, how is that fixable? Or do we just wait for all those people, and I'm speaking of my people, to just die off? Is that what's necessary? Does there need to be a mass die-off?
No, sometimes I think there does have to be generational shift like that, but no, I don't think that's the case here because you're seeing it filter down to younger people as well. And I think the Democrats have to address some of those concerns, right? They have to. I'm a little tired of everybody saying that Democrats have to think about the middle class, right? And the working class, because they do those things. But I think they have to be smart about how they frame that. I think Democrats have to think about how do we talk about diversity? How do we talk about inclusion in ways that won't allow Republicans to use that against them. I mean, think about all the anti-trans ads that Trump ran. You've got to find a way where you're supportive of these groups, but you don't allow the Republicans to use those against you, right? That's the difficult choice. How are you inclusive? And use language that's inclusive, but it doesn't play into Republican fear-mongering. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think Democrats have to really think strategically about doing that.
And I think Democrats need to learn how to fight and how to speak plainly. I think Democrats, you're absolutely right. Democrats support the policies that help the middle class. They want the middle class to succeed. They are not, totally in it for the tech bros and the billionaires to succeed. But so many of the Democrats in elected office talk like college professors. No offense to college professors.
No, you're right.
But, they have this. I'm thinking Chuck Schumer. I'm thinking Adam Schiff. Give me an AOC. Give me a Chris Murphy, who went on, was interviewed by some reporter over a week ago and was like, hey, we got to fight. We got a plan. We got to be taking action. Why is nobody doing this? And, but he's like a lone voice in the wilderness.
100%. I think about, I love Pete Buttigieg, but the reason I like him is he sounds like a college professor, and I know that's not going to be appealing. But, what I really thought was interesting was Tim Walz, right? I mean, he does some of that. He can take complex, Democratic policy and explain it in a more simple way, sort of reminiscent of how Bill Clinton did that. I mean, Bill Clinton was so good at that. And I think you're right. It's about finding ways to speak to normal people, and that's very, very appealing. And we have to avoid that tendency to go with the sort of the egghead college professor who isn't. The reality is, Joan, I'm not going to appeal to the masses, right? You want to find somebody who's a little more plain spoken.
Well, actually, you are an exception. Yeah. I only have people on the radio who talk like real people and make sense like real people. I mean, anybody who wants to, come on here and pontificate at an elite level, that's not going to resonate with me. That's not going to resonate with the audience. Yeah. I think you are you're the exception that proves the rule.
Well, thank you. But you're onto something, right? The Democrats really need to think about messaging and how do you message better? And again, the Democratic message is complicated because there's a diverse coalition. And so you got to think about different groups and how you send those messages, but it's so important. And yes, I think that's one way where the Democrats can be smart and push back against some of the oversimplification of the Republican Party right now.
Well, we need to wrap this up and take a break for news so that your colleague can join me. Suzanne,
I'm so excited. She's great. She'll tell you all the things I screwed up.
No. We're not going to go there. I'm sure she has new and interesting things to say about American politics. I didn't run this by her ahead of time, but one of the things I want to hopefully not ambush her with is I want to talk about the DNC. You know, there have been a number of people who want to lead the Democratic Party, be head of the DNC. And I'd like to talk to her about what that person needs to do and maybe some qualities that person needs to have.
That's fantastic, Joan. We were actually just talking about something similar at the office today. So you found the right person to have that conversation.
Excellent. All right. Well, until he fills in for me again, we're wrapping up this segment with political science professor William Muck from North Central College. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Joan. Really enjoy it.
We're going to take a break for news. We'll be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We like North Central College, and we believe that they have some incredibly articulate political science professors there. So let's go back to the pool at North Central College and pull out our favorite guest, Suzanne Chad, who is a political science professor who specializes in American political institutions, parties, campaigns, elections, etc., and so forth. Suzanne, how are you?
I'm great, and following Bill is a tough one, so I'm going to try my best here. But I appreciate I always appreciate that you want us on, and we love being on. So thanks, Jim.
Well, I enjoy talking to you immensely. And one of the things, there's so many things. Okay, where do we begin, Joan? Get yourself together and focus. So obviously, we are looking at a second Donald Trump term, which a lot of us now think will make that the first Trump term look like some kind of vacation. Because I don't think he's any smarter, but I think that there are a lot of smarter people who've realized that this is a man who wants to make money and wants to be famous and wants to give speeches and get lots of people to clap for him, but doesn't necessarily want to get into the nitty-gritty of governing. And they have graciously offered to step in and help with all that pesky governing, Project 2025 and et cetera and so forth. So as you look back at the first Trump term, what do you think about it? And what do you think the second term is going to look like?
Yeah, it's, like a lot of us, because we have 7 days to go, I think we're spending time reflecting on not the 4 years we just had, right? Not the 4 years we just had, but the 4 years we had before the 4 years we just had, to sort of see what we think we might have in store for us come, the 20th at noon. And the first thing that hit me as I was reflecting on this is the world is just so vastly different than it was in January of 2017 when Trump took office, in ways that I think that the chaos that we had at the beginning of his first term is so much more dangerous if we have that now. We were not in wars. We were not trying to come out of a pandemic still. We were not coming out of a recession and all of the things that came with it. We also didn't have far-right parties emerging in Europe and foreign leaders across the country stepping down because of votes of no confidence and wildfires in LA. I mean, the world is on fire literally and figuratively in ways that it was not in January of 2017. That makes me feel not fearful, maybe isn't the word, but more trepidation about the getting things under control as quickly as possible, whatever control looks like, with a president who doesn't really have any interest in institutional norms, doesn't have adults in the room to save him from himself as he did in his first term, and is more unabashed about going after who he perceives to be political opponents, even if it erodes democracy. And so I have concerns, to say the least.
I've heard some people make the argument that Democrats should not, obviously there are things that we care about and bridges that we don't want to burn, but that maybe the wisest strategy for Democrats is let him just sit back.
Yeah.
Let Trump be Trump. And then the belief being that people will be so appalled by what he does that when the midterm elections come along, suddenly, Democrats will be back in the driver's seat. But I don't know. I understand theoretically that that's a good argument. I think it's going to be really hard to sit back and let Trump be Trump.
Yeah, I think that exact strategy you described was one that I think a lot of people subscribed to at the beginning of 2017, because to your point, it may not be that he's more sort of politically intelligent or have more interest in understanding the ins and outs of governing, but he is savvier in how to get around all of those things. And so I think to sit back and let him implode, so to speak, in 2017-18 would not have had the damage that it will have now if that is the strategy, because he knows how to get around things more, because he has the party united behind him in a way the Republican Party in a way that he didn't before. And because of the chaos going on in the world and the lack of stability, that this idea of let it crash and burn so that the Democrats can do well in the midterms and in 2028, I think the real world consequences and tangible ramifications for people are way, way too dangerous to let that happen.
Do you think the party will stay united behind him if he's doing absurd stuff, and if they look ahead to the midterms and think to themselves, man, we're going to go down in flames. We're going to lose one house or both houses if this nonsense goes on unabated? Or will they say, look, this guy can hurt me. I'm up for re-election in the midterm elections, so I'm going to go along with anything he says, at least until the midterms are over. Will the party stay united? And if it doesn't, when will that break be?
Yeah, this is the question we've been asking. Political scientists have been asking for almost a decade, honestly, since he sort of entered the scene, at least since 2018, when the party started to coalesce more around him. And you said, I think you hit it on the head, as long as it's electorally beneficial, the Republican Party will stay united, especially because he is so outspoken about going after his opponents within the party, that if you don't want someone running, if you're a sitting member, you don't want to get primaried. And if you feel like you're going to get primaried, then you're going to toe the party line. And Speaker Johnson, we know, is going to toe the Trump party line in a way that Paul Ryan didn't. And he's no longer speaker for a reason. So I think as long as it's electorally beneficial, they're going to continue to do it. And because even when policies are actually unpopular with the public and unpopular with mainstream Republicans, they still go along with it because the party queue is so strong. And so I think a lot of things have to crack. And the midterm elections in 2026 will tell us some of that. And state elections, actually, in the off years will tell us some. But it's going to have to be sort of pieces falling into place as we get further in his term to see what this is going to look like.
Well, as you said, Paul Ryan didn't last. McCarthy didn't last. How long do you think Johnson's going to last? What did he win his speakership by, one vote?
And we knew he wasn't going to get on the first ballot because Thomas Massey from Kentucky, for example, he just is cantankerous. He's just that kind of member, and he likes to showboat. And so there wasn't anything that he was going to. No one was going to convince him to vote for Johnson. It was, I think that the way this went down was everybody was waiting to see if Trump was going to weigh in. Even Johnson was waiting to see if Trump was going to weigh in. And the minute he said, "This is our guy," those couple of holdout members just wanted to show that they weren't going to kowtow so easily. But if you recall how it went, they didn't actually have 2 votes. They never closed the first vote. So really, there was only 1 vote, and he won on the first ballot, which I think was so interesting how they did that strategically. So as long as he continues to say all the things he's saying, which is Trump is the leader of the party and Trump is going to tell us what to do, he will get to keep his job.
Interesting. I want to talk to you. The chaos has begun early. I mean, the chaos, sure. Joe Biden seems to have pretty much bowed out. Kamala Harris seems to have pretty much disappeared, as has Tim Walz. There seems to be a real vacuum of leadership. And, of course, Trump has stepped in with all of his chaos. When we come back, I want to talk to you about Canada and Greenland and Panama and all of this insanity that is going on already. I'm talking to political science professor Suzanne Chad, North Central College. We will be back with more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Political science professor Suzanne Chad and I are talking about the chaos that is happening now and will continue to happen throughout Donald Trump's 4-year term. But he seems to be trying to distract us. That's the only thing that I can think of. You know, this idea that we should annex Greenland or buy Greenland, or, you know, Canada should be the 51st state. And, oh, by the way, Panama, we should. Why are they governing themselves? You know, they should be a part of our union as well. I think that whether or not he believes in his heart of heart that these things should happen, I believe that Donald Trump is a master of media manipulation, and that as long as we're focusing on, oh, my God, he wants to buy Greenland, we're not focusing on, hey, what's going on with the Jack Smith report? Is it going to be released or is it not going to be released? Hey, did anybody notice how he said after he was elected that he actually won't be able to reduce grocery prices because, you know, that's hard? There's a direct quote. I don't think I can do that. That's hard.
Right.
What do you think about all this?
Yeah, I think that to your point, he's a master at getting, he said this when he ran for 2016, that he's a ratings machine, and he still believes that that's the case. But I think it's also, I said this in class last week when we had classes for the beginning of the semester, that whether we think he's going to do these things, like we constitutionally know he can't annex Greenland, he can't change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, he can't go and take over Canada. Like, we know that he can't do these things, but it's not unimportant that he's talking about them, because what it signals to me is this idea of like America first that he has run with for so long is taking this overtly imperialistic turn in a way that he feels agency to do because the people will support it. And I think we've heard this in some of our circles. I'd be curious, Joan, if you've talked to people about this, where you were talking to Bill earlier about people in your life who voted for Trump, for example, that there are people who are like, I think it's a great idea. Let's take Canada. Let's annex Greenland. These are not people who would have ever maybe suggested this before, but he knows that when he says something as unconstitutional as it is, it will get coverage and it will get support from the people.
He's a master at knowing how to push the media's buttons. There's no doubt about that. And I don't know if you saw, I forget her name. She's a high-ranking person in the Canadian government. And I should have saved this clip because it is awesome. And she talks about the fact that not only does Canada not want to be the 51st state, but maybe, hey, state of Washington, state of Oregon, state of California, maybe you'd like to be Canada's newest province. We'll call you Arcadia. And you know what? You'll get free health care. You know, you're going to get all of these benefits that we have in Canada. Hey, how about it? And I got to tell you, if I lived in Washington, Oregon, or California, I would be waving my hand saying, where do I sign up? Where do I sign up?
Yeah, I mean, you turn it around the other way, and and that's her point, right? Is you turn this around any other way with any other relationship with countries and any other foreign leader, unless we're talking about autocracies, right? You talk about democracies. This is not something that people say, and that presidents-elect say. But again, sort of the what this signals to me is that nothing is off the table, and when he had adults in the room in that first term that saved him from himself, we have so much data, so much literature that suggests that he would have done more things, more dangerous things, more unconstitutional things, had he not had people in the room to tell him you can't do that. Well, he doesn't have those people around him anymore. And he has the support of his party, and he has the support of the people that voted for him. And so I think we're going to see more rhetoric like this. Whether any of it happens, in some ways, is not as important because he's talking about doing it.
And also, you know, we are, some of us, dumbfounded at the election and the man we have decided to return to the White House. But internationally, incumbents have not been faring well, and far-right politicians have been gaining ground. So is what's happening here in the United States just our version of that, or is what's happening here different?
Yeah, it's so, you know, Bill, of course, is the one to talk to you about this in more depth, and he's helped me see this in some really interesting ways that an Americanist doesn't typically see, right? So I think that they're all happening in tandem, but the one thing that is unique in the United States when we look at the emergence and expansion of far-right politics is in the United States, it's about race. So you look at what's going on in Germany, you look at what's going on in France, and it's about identities in different ways, but not about racial identities. And so when we think about what the far-right party is doing here, and that it's half of the country as opposed to pockets and coalitions like we see in Europe, that taking us backwards in that Make America Great Again is about oppressing those who had to argue their way into constitutional protections. There is something that's unique about the way we do it in the United States because it rests so squarely on race. I'm not suggesting that in other parts of the world, identity is unimportant, but it is uniquely about race here in the United States.
And what role do you think misogyny plays? And I talked to one political scientist who said that there actually are ways to measure that. You ask these very cleverly worded questions that, you know, even people who don't want to admit that they'd never vote for a woman will be sort of tricked into revealing that that's what they believe. You know, does that sort of questioning exist? Is that data reliable? And has anybody looked into it yet?
Yeah, so those questions do exist. We have a scale where we can measure what we call hostile sexism, which is basically, do you think that when women get power, they take over men's power in a way that is dangerous? And we can ask questions that get at that without asking someone, are you sexist? And as you might imagine, we've seen more of these studies since 2016. And we saw very, very clearly the suggestion is that if you carry these hostily sexist attitudes, you are much less likely to vote for a woman, regardless of party. Because there are hostily sexist people in the Democratic Party, right? I mean, we're more likely to see them on the conservative side. But those data exist, those measures exist. And what we need to do, and what we need to do a better job of now that we have come out of the 2024 election, is to look at that intersection of race and gender in a way that we haven't maybe looked at it before, and look at that with partisanship and all of that.
When you're trying to gather this kind of data, how do you find your sample?
So that's such a good question. So in political science, we're really lucky in that we have these methods where we can tap into these data sets that already exist and add questions onto them, these like national data sets where surveys go out to people, and we can bring the data in a way that makes it as reflective of the real population as possible. But there's also ways that we can seek out that information where you can put surveys online and you can get people to do them and you can pay them a little bit of money for them. There's all these ways that we have been able to get these larger data sets, and we've been doing this for decades. Adding the questions over time is really important, and taking questions out that don't really matter anymore. And so we need to continue to do this work, not just because as scientists we want to know what motivates people to vote or not vote, but we have
that's my other question.
To explain the world. Yeah, please.
Tell me what the data has shown, if there's any decent collection by now. The people, the tens of millions of registered Democratic voters who came out for Joe Biden and stayed home for Kamala Harris, why? Have you got any data to explain to me why?
Oh, gosh. This is the one frustrating thing, is that science moves slow, and we've got to, we have to do these things afterwards. And so those questions are being fielded, and we're getting that information. We're trying to. We don't have anything concrete we can say definitively, like with statistical significance, for example, that it was this or this or this. We have theories based on some of the things you and I have already described, and we've got that stuff in the field, but you are the first person I will tell when I get that information.
Okay, because that's really what made the difference here. I mean, Trump didn't do much different than he did 4 years ago. Same folks seemingly supporting him, but Kamala did worse than Joe Biden. Some people seem to believe that some Democrats stayed home because of the way the situation in Gaza unfolded, that Joe Biden didn't do enough and they were mad. And so they decided that they were either, like, there were a lot of votes in Michigan for Jill Stein, which were considered to be protest votes. There's a very big Muslim community there. I mean, but it wasn't, Joe Biden wasn't running. Some people said that, I think Kamala Harris was in a real tough spot. She's still, she was the vice president. She is the vice president. And people kept saying, well, how are you different from Joe? And do you think Joe did this right? Or how would you do Gaza differently? And I think she had to walk a real tightrope, because she can't just come out and say, as if she were a senator or something, she could come out and say, I think Joe Biden has been moving too slowly. I don't think he's been tough enough with Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's how, because that's like, dear God in heaven, she's still the vice president, and that's still her president. I think it was a situation where she couldn't win.
No, you're right. And I think what's important about everything you just said, and if hopefully the listeners are learning a lot from listening to Bill and I, and you, of course, asking great questions. But if they take nothing else out of our last 20 minutes together, is it's never one thing, right? It is a puzzle. It is a matrix of things that gives us an election outcome. It is an anti-incumbent sentiment across the world. It's race, it's gender, it's issue-based, it's personality, it's characteristics of voters and identities of voters. It is this matrix of things we have to look at. And so when we boil it down to, it's this one thing, or if she had done this, or had she had done this, or had this voter done this, that differently. It is so much more complicated than that, which is frustrating for people who just want to know what happened. And also for the powers that be in the Democratic Party that are trying to select a chair, for example, to decide where does the party move next. But if we're going to do it right, it's going to take some time, and we have to do it right.
When you think about the next 4 years, what goes through your mind, and what advice would you give for those listening now who voted for Kamala Harris, who are really, really devastated? How do we move forward? How do we get through the next 4 years?
Yeah, I know we had spoken right after the election, and this was the thing that the students asked most of, like, what do we do now? Because we spend so much time focusing on canvassing and door knocking and petitions and voting and all the things. And those are still important because we have local elections all the time. But there's this sense of helplessness of, sitting in the next 4 years, what do we do? And so the one thing that I will say is find your why. I know that sounds like so cliche, right? But why? What is the most important thing to you? Why do you want to be involved? Why are you feeling the way that you're feeling? And talk to somebody, contact somebody who's working on the same issues as you, and find a way to get involved, even if it is something that's seemingly small as, writing a letter to your congressperson. Because the feeling of helplessness is the worst part, right? The election is over. We sit in the next 4 years. But small acts are not so small when everyone is engaging in them. And so there's a quote that I had heard during the George Floyd protest that, like, now that the lights are on, we can't turn them back off. We know the lights are on. The lights were on in 2017 when Trump took office. We know what the 4 years looked like with those lights on. We have to keep the lights on so we see what's happening and hold people to account. We can't turn the lights off.
I love that. I love that. Keep the lights on. I think that is an excellent, excellent way to describe this. Political science professor Suzanne Chod from North Central College, thank you. Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for that. It's something we can carry going forward.
Thank you so much, Joan. I hope I get to talk to you soon.
We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with much more after this.
Live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
You may or may not have seen there was some breaking news that President Biden announced this morning where he believes that Israel and Hamas are very close to a deal for a ceasefire and release of hostages in Gaza. I haven't had a chance to look into that in any detail, but right now maybe our next guest knows something about that. We're talking to Dr. Lauren Liebarger, author and associate professor of classics and world religions at Ohio University. Dr. Liebarger, did you hear this news that was announced by Joe Biden today? Okay. We seem to have lost our connection. Paul is going to... Dr. Liebarger, you're not muted, are you? Could you double check that? Okay, well, since we have a little bit of time, and since I forgot to do this earlier, Paul, let me read off the contest. You can reestablish the connection, and then when I finish and we're going to be chatting, then you can man the phone lines. All this week, once every show, I'm going to give away a couple of tickets to see the Capitol Fools. They're coming to Skokie, North Shore Center for the Performing Arts in Skokie. There's going to be 3 shows, 2 shows Saturday, February 1st, 1 show Sunday, February 2nd, and it is going to be at the North Shore Center for the Performing Arts. If they used to be called the Capitol Steps, now they're called the Capitol Fools. If you've never seen them, trust me, if you enjoy the discussions on this station, if you enjoy the comedy political discussions of Stephanie Miller, you are going to really enjoy the Capitol Fools. I can't even tell you what's going to be in the show because it is so topical. Trust me, if news breaks the morning of February 1st, it will be incorporated into their shows. They do comedic skits. They create political comedic songs. It is wildly entertaining. I've seen them before and really enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, for the Saturday show, February 1st, I'm going to be there. I think Richard Chu's going to be at one of the shows, too. I'm going to be at the Saturday night show. We're going to have a WCPT table in the lobby that I'll be at, and then I will be up on stage welcoming you and introducing the Capitol Fools. So if you are the third caller, 773-763-9278. If you're the third caller, we're going to give you a pair of tickets to see the Capitol Fools. Our contests are open to anybody as long as you're at least 18 years old, live in the greater Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana area. 1 entry per person, 1 winner per household, void where prohibited by law. Listeners may only win or qualify to win once every 30 days. All the rules are on our website, WCPT820.com. Find and click on the contest tab. Okay, Paul, do we have Dr. Liebarger? Yay!
Yes, I think I'm here. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Sorry about that. It's good to be here, Joan. Thank you. I think we started out with a question about the ongoing ceasefire talks, and it sounds
did you hear President Biden say, they're close, they're really, really, really close to a deal?
Yeah, I know. And we've been here before, right? I mean, they've been really, really close, and then things fall through, which is sort of the default, I think, for these things. But the fact that we have high-level Israeli security personnel leadership involved with the talks, and that Hamas has signed off on the basic memorandum. It does sound hopeful. It does sound close. And I think the fact that also the incoming President Trump has signaled very clearly that he wants a deal done before he arrives in office. He very clearly does not want to have to be dealing with this situation. And I believe that Netanyahu quite likely will want to give Trump a win as he's coming in. It's sort of like the Iranians in 1979 releasing the hostages on the very day that Jimmy Carter left office. Sort of a similar kind of dynamic here. But so a gift for Trump possibly is maybe motivating Netanyahu. But of course, Netanyahu has to deal with his own pressures within his coalition, right? So you have Ben-Gvir and Smotrich signaling very, very loudly that this deal represents a, quote, catastrophe. And their coalition has said very clearly that they will vote against this. So it's possible that if this goes through, Netanyahu's coalition could fall apart. However, in reading Haaretz today, it was interesting to see that this is the Israeli English newspaper. It was interesting to see a statement from Aryeh Deri, who is the leader of the Shas movement, an ultra-conservative religious movement, saying that they would support this. And so, and as well as some other leaders of other blocs within the Knesset saying that they will support this. So it's maybe possible that a new coalition could come into existence that would enable Netanyahu to sign off, even if he loses the settler right wing. This has always been the problem with these negotiations. Of course, Hamas has its own internal dysfunctions and dynamics, but it's really been Israel and the Netanyahu government that has been a real hurdle, and that has a lot to do with the makeup of the coalition.
You said in the beginning of your remarks just now that everyone had agreed to a basic memorandum. What does that mean? I mean, is that like, well, we agree in principle that you'll give up the hostages, and we agree in principle that we won't use any more like big bombs, and then everybody has to work out the details of the who, what, where, when, and why? Is that what that means?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic agreement being that, a certain number of hostages, I think it was 37 hostages would be released, and that there was a sticking point about whether some of these hostages counted as military personnel and therefore, would come at a higher price with respect to the Palestinian political prisoners who would be released. So if these...
so this isn't just... because Benjamin Netanyahu, correct me if I'm wrong, not too long ago said, this is like your last chance to release the hostages, and if you don't, basically we're going to level Gaza. This isn't the result of that. This is still, okay, we have 37 hostages. There were 37,000 Palestinian prisoners. This is still that.
Yeah, I'm sort of getting into the weeds of the deal, but there have been these various sticking points. Of course, Israel has held the hammer over the head of Hamas and has continued its bombardments. We can get into that in a second in terms of what the impact of all of that has been. But at this point, there's not much more to level, right? I mean, Gaza has been destroyed and has been reduced to rubble. And, Israel, I think... So Hamas has wanted to, one of the things that it's wanted has been a definitive end of the war, as they don't want to have to come back and have to, renegotiate and have to continue with the hostilities. They are a deeply damaged organization. Of course, the price for Palestinians in Gaza has been incredibly high for civilians. And I think Hamas has felt pressure from Palestinian civilians as well, to bring this to a close. But Israel, and Netanyahu, it's in some ways has painted itself into a corner by saying that the goal is complete destruction of Hamas. And that always was unrealistic, right? I mean, Hamas is as much an idea as it is an organization. And it's not, as long as you have a Palestinian issue that has been left unresolved and you haven't come to any sort of final resolution of this, fundamental core problem, you're going to have, some form of Palestinian resistance. It might not be Hamas. It might take some other form in the future. So this idea that you're going to defeat Hamas as if to say you're going to defeat the Palestinians once and for all, that was never going to be possible. And so, Netanyahu needs to find a way to climb back down. And, maybe the ceasefire deal is the beginning of that possibility in the same way that he was, able to sort of climb down in Lebanon and negotiate, a withdrawal of forces in Lebanon. This ceasefire would entail some Israeli military redeployments, withdrawals to a buffer zone. There's been, disputes and discussion about what that buffer zone would look like, how big it should be, and so on. It looks like Hamas has been willing to be flexible on the size of that buffer zone. But who's going to get released in these prisoner exchanges is also kind of an interesting, intriguing mystery. There was mention of possibly the release of Marwan Barghouti, who is a really important figure within the Fatah movement, not Hamas, in the sort of the secular nationalist Fatah movement, and represents the kind of a new generation of leadership who, maybe not of the same stature as Nelson Mandela, but who would command a lot more respect on the Palestinian street, and possibly become somebody who could coalesce a new sort of political reality for Palestinians capable of negotiating, in the interests of Palestinians and initiating a movement toward, something more functional, something more representative of the Palestinian people. So, I mean, if Barghouti gets released, that would be kind of an interesting development. I don't know if he will, but I did see mention of that as well. So this is all very intriguing, Joan. I just don't know. As I said, I mean, we've been close in the past, and things have fallen through. It could very well fall through. But I think the fact that Trump has asked for this and Netanyahu really wants Trump's backing for other things, for example, support for annexing the West Bank, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I could see him wanting to, be able to present a gift of some sort to Trump on his inauguration day.
In addition to wanting to present Trump with a victory, you mentioned Lebanon. Hezbollah has really taken some serious blows. Some people believe it has been essentially neutered. Does that have any impact on Hamas? Does that mean one of our, because originally there was speculation that the reason that they attacked was that they were hoping that other people would jump in and this would end up being a huge war that Israel was fighting on several fronts. Hezbollah now has at least temporarily been taken off the table. Did that have any effect here?
Well, it has to have had an effect, and the fact that Israel has so successfully decapitated the leadership of Hezbollah, but also of Hamas, leaves these groups in disarray. Now, I mean, the organizations are not obliterated and will reconstitute themselves so long as the basic conditions of the conflict remain unresolved. But you're right. For the time being, Hezbollah now has ceased to be any sort of strategic factor. Although, as you noted, this was a part of the calculus of Yahya Sinwar and the other leaders of Hamas who launched the attacks on October 7th, was to try to draw in Iran and Hezbollah into a larger, wider conflict. And for a while, it looked like that might occur. But the Israeli military response has been utterly devastating, and this has come also with rock solid support from the United States. It has really demonstrated the capacity of Israel and the United States through Israel to project force. I think that this has led to as well. I mean, the suffering of Palestinians and the Lebanese creates real problems for these groups. That. For Hamas and for Hezbollah to maintain their credibility and legitimacy within their respective societies, this has been, utterly devastating, for Palestinians and for the Lebanese. I mean, there are more than 4,000, Lebanese who have been killed and more than 1 million displaced. It's been a disaster for Lebanon. And the same is true, and even more so for Palestinians in Gaza. I don't know whether you saw that Lancet, the British medical journal, just recently released a report in which they said, these current numbers that have, typically been repeated in the global media, drawn from Palestinian sources of 45,000 Palestinians killed, represents a massive undercount. I mean, they're estimating as many as 64,260 people have been killed in traumatic injury deaths in Gaza between October 7th and June 30th of 2024. As many as 70,000 Palestinians possibly have been killed in Gaza, according to this British medical journal. And 60% of these are children and women and children. So, I mean, it's substantially higher. And we've known this. We have known that these figures would be substantially higher than the numbers that we have been quoting. But now we're starting to get this statistical modeling showing that this very, very well could be the case. So the level of suffering has been utterly immense. And I can only think that this has created pressure internally on Hamas. The loss of Hezbollah as a counterweight, as a potential counterweight, strategic counterweight, also demonstrates this. And frankly, Iran, which finds itself on its heels and incapable of projecting force any longer regionally, and having to confront an incoming Trump administration that imposed sanctions and ended the nuclear deal that the Obama administration had negotiated with them. I don't know. I mean, Trump is a real wild card. He has signaled both that he wants to do a deal with Iran, but his actions in the past have been much more bellicose. And Iran also has attempted to assassinate Trump. So this is
there is that.
I mean, there's not a whole lot of love lost here, but then again, Trump, I think is wary of foreign entanglements. He did negotiate a deal with the Taliban prior to Biden's presidency. That's the other thing that's interesting here, maybe also to point out. Muin Robani, in a piece that I read, he's a commentator, analyst, Palestinian, has made the really good point that when you look at American foreign policy across different presidential administrations, it's easy to think, or it's especially when we think about Trump, right, as representing kind of a difference and a new approach, when in fact, when you look at the actual policies, there's actually quite a bit of continuity. So, for example, take for example the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I mean, that was initiated by the Trump administration, and Biden simply continued it. And I mean, the withdrawal, of course, was botched and horribly done. But that's just an example of the continuity. And similarly, with China, the Biden administration maintained many of the sanctions that the Trump administration imposed. And then, with respect to Israel and Palestine, I mean, Trump moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, but it was Biden who backed this devastating war. And used very little leverage, if anything, with Israel to mitigate the impact of the destruction. And so, I mean, if you're a Palestinian looking at this, and you see Trump coming in, it's very hard to see much of a difference, right? I mean, that being from one administration to another. I think maybe if there is going to be a difference, it'll be in Trump's desire to kind of do a deal and sideline the Palestinian issue once and for all, as he attempted to do with the Abrahamic Accords during his first administration. And he probably will try to expand on that and do this deal and call it peace. I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see.
Dr. Lieberger, we need to take a break. And when we come back, you just touched on where I'd like to go next. Peace. What does that look like? And will there ever be a Palestinian state? We are going to take a real quick break. We're going to be back right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by Dr. Lauren Lieberger, who's an associate professor of classics and world religions at Ohio University. We have been talking about Gaza and the Middle East. Especially with the Trump administration coming in, Trump, huge supporter of Netanyahu, former Trump official Mike Pompeo saying Netanyahu needs to finish the job, whatever that means. What does peace in the Middle East look like realistically? Oh,
well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, Joan. when you immediately I thought, peace is always in the eye of the beholder. Is peace the absence of conflict and violence, or does peace, require some semblance of justice? And again, justice being, obviously understood in very different ways, depending on what your position is and your relationship to this conflict is. We're thinking about the incoming Trump administration. We had talked before the break about how, Trump is unpredictable. On one hand, he seems to want to be able to do these grand deals and, have his name on it. And that looks good for him. He's very transactional. You do this for me, and then good things will go in your direction. He negotiated the Abraham Accords. That was between Israel, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Sudan, Morocco. The big prize was always Saudi Arabia. And as one of the consequences actually of that Abrahamic Accord was actually October 7th, because Hamas and other Palestinians had rightly seen that the Palestinian issue had been sidelined by these Abraham Accords. So you can have one of these grand accords, but if the Palestinians are not a part of it, and Palestinians, who have legitimate leadership and leadership supported and seen as legitimate by the Palestinians themselves participating in this, and if the agreement is not resulting in some form of Palestinian statehood in line with the UN resolutions 242 and 338 after 1967, then this is really not going to go anywhere. I mean, you haven't solved the core problem, and that was always the issue with the Abraham Accords. So, I don't know whether Trump understands that, but he probably thinks that the Palestinians are a non-entity here. Maybe can be possibly bought off. But the idea that if Saudi Arabia remains sort of the grand prize here in terms of being able to normalize Israel within the region, then I think Saudi participation is going to come with a high price. And part of that high price after October 7th is going to be resolving the Palestinian issue in line with the Arab peace plan, which is basically the international consensus on two states. So it's often said that the two-state solution is dead in the water and is really a non-starter, but it is the only solution that has any international backing. It actually has international agreements behind it in the form of the Oslo process. As flawed and as faulty as that process was, that is the only international framework that exists right now. One state is really a non-starter. No Israeli, or very few Israelis, are ever going to, support something like that. And Palestinians, frankly, would be, profoundly disadvantaged in the one-state situation. In fact, what you have is a kind of one-state reality right now, with Israel in control of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights, and all the rest. So, it's Israeli control and power already from the river to the sea. The question is this sustainable in the long run? Now, if Israel wants to, maintain this, if it doesn't want to do a deal, right? And there are many voices that say, well, this is, maybe there's no deal and Israel just continues on here and tries to find a way to manage it. You've got elements like this settler right wing and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir very vocally calling for annexation of the West Bank and of the Gaza Strip. And
that's what I was going to ask you. Project. What would where are we carving out that Palestinian state? Golan Heights? I can't see the West Bank being turned into a Palestinian state. I mean, are we going to say the Gaza Strip? Yeah, that's the Palestinian state. I mean, where is it going to be?
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's a fair question. I mean, that is the very thing that people point to when they say that the two-state solution is no longer even a possibility. Even if it ever was a possibility, it's no longer one because, the ship has sailed. The settlements are too deeply embedded, and there just isn't any political constituency for this any longer. Certainly not within Israel. But if it's not the two-state solution, then what, right? I mean, the one-state solution is even more of an unreality in terms of a single democratic state. That's not going to ever come into existence in any immediate way. And so what you are left with is a one-state reality in which Israel, in which Israelis have democratic rights, Palestinians do not, and continue to live under these apartheid-like conditions. And I don't think that's sustainable. I mean, I think that this is just simply punting the ball down the field, and you're going to have another October 7th in some form or another further down the line. So,
Dr. Leiberger, we need to continue this discussion at a future date because I did not allot enough time for us. We are at the end of my show. Please come back again soon.
It would be a pleasure too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Dr. Leiberger, Lauren Leiberger, is an author, an associate professor of classics and world religions at Ohio University. That is it for me today. Another wonderful discussion that we didn't get a chance to really finish. Okay. But I will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Driving It Home with Patty Vasquez is up next. And, of course, Richard Chu starts our day every day at 6 a.m. Have a great evening, my friends. Put your feet up. And, just don't meditate. Go ahead. Let's all agree we're going to meditate for 5 minutes tonight, okay? We're going to get through this. We are going to abide. I will see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Have a great evening. Good night.